It's just a few more hours, folks, before yet another U.S. fascist presidential election. A farce. If you vote in this presidential election, you are validating the fascist system that is not merely problematic, not merely killed 300 million people, many of which in living memory in wars of theft and anti-communist wars, not merely problematic, but the driving force behind the omnicide, which if you don't have your thesaurus in front of you, that is capitalism's climate apocalypse, the death of all humankind, and the driving force behind that is the United States military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, but it's far worse than that, because its only real job on the world stage doesn't help a single human being, doesn't help American people, doesn't help people in other countries. Its only real job on the world stage is to protect other super-polluting corporations and fascist agencies, other fascist countries like the fascist state of Israel, as it's so called, occupied Palestine. It does nothing good in this world. The studies have suggested that in 2024, the use of ordnance by the fascist puppet state of the fascist United States, so-called Israel, the use of ordnance alone in that country against civilians, killing hundreds of thousands of young people, children, and women in the last year, that is about 5% of the total contribution in 2024 to the climate crisis. Is just shitty fucking Israel bombing the hell out of people with U.S. bombs. It's 5% of the problem right there. We've got to stop all of the problem, right? And that doesn't happen. There's 0% chance of that happening as long as the United States military-industrial complex continues to exist. You know, I introduced myself, and you hear this name Ben-Zion, and you say, Jesus Christ, is this a Zionist? And you know what? That's a correct response. That's a correct response. If your first response when you hear someone with a name like that is fuck that guy, hey, that's the correct response. But I am not a Zionist. I am a Ben-Zionist, which is something that if you really want to get into, you can watch some other shows, because I'm going to try and stay on topic here now. Tomorrow is a presidential election in the fascist United States. And in the last presidential election, I was involved as I am in this election. This election, I'm a write-in candidate, doing that one thing that no other candidate is going to do in this fascist fucking country. Not Jill Stein, not Claudia Garcia, God love her, not brother, always refers to everyone as brother, and his name is on the tip of my tongue. A man who's made a palpable contribution to writings to do with African liberation is a presidential candidate. Richard, if you can refresh my memory, I'd appreciate it. It was right on the tip of my tongue. These are all good people. That's to say, anti-imperialists with an anti-capitalist mandate. Not people who should face the wall, but not a single one of them says what Ben-Zion says, which is that I have written an executive order that will disband the omnicide and the omnicide by disbanding the United States federal government. It's the only way to end the military-industrial complex in the 4.5 years we have left, according to all credible climate scientists, before we reach runaway overheating caused by capitalism's climate apocalypse. After that, that's the ball game, folks. You'll be the Walking Dead. You'll still be walking around, but it won't be but a few more decades before your planet is more like the planet Venus than the planet Earth. That's to say, not sustaining multicellular life at that point. And that's not down to bad vibes from U.S. fascists and Western fascists. It's not because they're meanies, even though they are. They're exceedingly bad people. It's because of the industrial bases. And the most significant factor there is the U.S. military-industrial complex. but we have to transform all of these industrial bases. So I've written this executive order more than a year ago. I made some changes to it since. Um, and that's what I would sign on day one um, of my presidency. And it's very unlikely that I'll be president in January of 2025. Um, such a thing For such a thing to occur, the United States would practically already be rubble um, by January 2025. Let's say if someone exercises first strike capability against the United States, which would be a horrible thing, right? DC turned into a nuclear wasteland. My God, that would be horrible. But on that day, if that were to occur, what would also happen is a chance of humanity surviving to the end of this century without a billion person or multi-billion person loss of life. That likelihood would go up, surviving to the end of the century intact by about 20%, maybe. If the United States were removed from the equation, maybe more. Everyone knows that the fascist United States is the problem, capital P problem, and virtually no one is going to say that it needs to be removed from the equation. Jill Stein, what happens if Jill Stein becomes president? For Jill Stein to become president, DC would not have to become more or less obliterated by January 2025. All that would really happen for that to happen is for something less outlandish, like Donald Trump getting COVID tomorrow and dying in the course of the election. It's not likely, but it's more likely than destruction of a fascist superpower. Um, what happens if Jill Stein is president in January of 2025? Not that much. There's a chance you'll have a public health service by a good chance, a better chance than under anyone else that you'll have a public health service by, say, January of 2029, when that person's presidency would presumably end. Um, but what happens in January of 2029? Well, that's around the time, a rounding error of the time, when capitalism's climate apocalypse has now rendered any future efforts at the betterment of humankind completely unmeaningful because we've reached runaway overheating, which will make this planet uninhabitable for primate life yourself and probably much multicellular life. Or perhaps you say, Ben, I don't think that's going to happen. I think what will happen is some people will die. Of course, you are very likely to die. If billions of people die, you're very likely to. It's worse than playing Russian roulette to say such a thing. But you say, I don't think everyone will die. I consider that's just about the most racist thing that anyone's ever said. Because the causes of the capitalist climate apocalypse, this military-industrial complex, the petroleum products consumed by the West, the other things like livestock systems, luxury products for the West. These are the top three contributors, not even necessarily in that order. Some studies suggest that livestock systems are worse than fossil fuels. But certainly when you consider that this is all being held in place by the fascist military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, which its contribution there comes down to fossil fuels. You would say that fossil fuels are far more the culprit from that light. So this I saw a good comrade Booker from Kenya, describing how the capitalist climate apocalypse is affecting his country at twice the rate of those. Another good liberation-minded comrade whose name I forgot moments ago, Cornel West. I remember it now. I knew it was on the tip of my tongue. A good comrade described how in Kenya, twice the speed of the ravages of capitalism's climate apocalypse in his region as anywhere else on Earth. This is by design. just as the fascist United States went into its biolabs from the 80s until the present and started building bioweapons that would specifically target indigenous people and new African people and people of African descent, darker skinned people. What kind of people, do you wonder, build bioweapons that would target those groups specifically? Well, those fucking fascists, right? The United States, no other countries come close to killing 300 million people in these wars and genocidal actions as the United States has done. You can point to things not even that far removed, like this Palestine proxy war that's ongoing, like the mass murder of about 2.5 million Iraqis in the course of the 1990s and then the 2000s. What kind of people kill 300 million people in the course of their existence? This is fascist. The United States is a fascist country. The European descended pig majority, these people are overwhelmingly fascists. They have no reservations about doing things like that over and over again, as evidenced by this presidential platform-free presidential election, right? These two candidates both have the same platform. They're both neoconservatives and neoliberals, effectively, in foreign policy and domestic policy, more or less. They, in previous elections with Democrats, sometimes you would hear people say something like, "We should have a public health service." No discussion of that this year. No serious discussion of ending capitalism's climate apocalypse, which, as I have contended, no serious discussion there can occur without talking about ending the U.S. military-industrial abomination. But no discussion of it at all. It's turned into the most ridiculous of sideshows, and that's been the case for many decades. The last president, I'd have something like a 5-year plan to contend with the 5-year plans of more seriously organized countries, generally, was President Nixon. He was the last person to say anything serious to do with policy in campaigning. And as he's generally held to be one of the worst presidents, but he was dramatically less fascistic than almost anybody since, in certain respects. He kind of scuttled it, but he made something like a good faith effort to pass the equivalent of a universal basic income that would be equal to about $25,000 today. Millions of people would still be walking around in the sunshine. That's something like a 5-year plan to do that. He almost passed a collectivized child care system. Again, he kind of rat fucked it, and other people like him rat fucked it. That's to say, conservatives. But that would be hundreds of thousands of people whose lives would be better, hundreds of thousands of people, you could say, whose lives, or certainly marriages, like mine, wouldn't have been cut short by this onerous cost of for-profit childcare. There's not been, a president who followed him who's on death's door. He's, Carter, right? We didn't immediately follow him, but the next full election cycle, he's generally held to be this good Christian, verging on Christian socialist president. Of course, that's a lie, just in the sense that somebody who would point to JFK and say, "Oh, I'm a Christian socialist, and I love JFK, and I love Jimmy Carter." No, those people, you're a crypto-fascist if you say something like that. These people are still capitalists, maybe not chomping at the bit, far-right neo-capitalists, but still capitalists, still people who, if people like this were in power, the planet would still be dying, just at a 1% slower speed, something like this. But Zegna Brzezinski, um, one of the worst human beings that's ever walked the earth, probably makes Henry Kissinger look like a saint. 'Cause Henry Kissinger was kind of a fuck up compared to this guy. This guy accomplished the thing that Henry Kissinger, big brain Henry Kissinger, wanted to do, but couldn't do because he wasn't that smart. He just happened to be close to a lot of powerful people. But Zegna Brzezinski created this poison pill of the Afghanistan war that was, the USSR was baited into. That's more or less held to be the major cause of the fall of the USSR. But really, the major cause of the fall of the USSR is fascism, right? Major cause of the fall of state socialism in any form, or the undermining of state socialist or generally progressive undertakings in any form, is fascism, and particularly U.S. fascism. It's been the architect, the mastermind, the ringleader of anti-communist slash fascist actions for about a century. And those are the same thing, right? If you have a problem with communism, that's because you're a fascist. Don't fucking kid yourself. All right, those are the same fucking thing. You say, fuck you. You're a fascist. You're a crypto fascist. You're a fascist in denial. If you have a problem with communism, you're a fascist because all that communism is people willing to stand up for a humane and sustainable economic system in a world where without that sustainability, without that type of organization, humans will soon be extinct. So when you're faced with that, the need to organize to build an economic system that's actually viable, and you give some bullshit reason why you wouldn't fight for that, why you wouldn't support that, why you wouldn't want to be in the same room with people who would do that, you're a fascist. You are a fascist. And the denial about this is much like the denial about U.S. fascism. Um, there's a lot of different ways to designate something fascistic. One definition is just capitalism plus violence, a pretty simple thing to understand relative to some of the others. And that by that estimation, the U.S. is by far the worst fascist nation in history. So there's two fascist presidential candidates. One of them is very likely to be the president. It's not too clear which one is going to win. Since 2018, the U.S. Democratic Party went from being highly neoliberal captured to being more or less a CIA asset. You can literally track hundreds and hundreds of people who were working for the CIA who ran for office in that year, whereas people like that were not so brazen in years before. This is pretty well in evidence with the Kamala Harris campaign having no platform, nothing that would distinguish her at all from the fascists that she's supposedly saving you from, except for a couple of wedge issues that have no impact or marginal impact. Most of them have little or no impact, these wedge issues, on material conditions of human beings living in the United States. The only thing that should matter in these kind of considerations is specifically pushed far, far to the periphery so that you will never think of things like a public health service that will kill 100,000 and 200,000 people a year in the years 2025 to 2029. You will never think about things like a public health a crisis in the form of a lack of a housing authority that guarantees housing to all, as many countries also quite easily do, as they quite easily do have a national health service, and that is keeping 1 million plus people on the streets or living out of their cars, highly unstably housed per year, and that is also a death sentence for those people. Right, unhoused people have about half the life expectancy of other people. And what do you know? Who is it that is excluded by these things primarily? Brown skinned folks, black folks. that is the main reason why the United States capitalist system shifted into this neoliberal mode, so that they wouldn't have to have these basic human decency kinds of things like jobs programs, like a housing authority, like a national health service, because the hatred for the Turtle Islander and other brown-skinned folks, the hatred for the new African, is the most important feature of the European descended pig. And you ask any given European descended pig, is this your most important feature? Despising these kinds of people, they'll stop for a second. They'll catch their breath. They're surprised that you would know that about them and what lives in their dark heart of hearts. But then they say, no, 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 that's not who I am. Well, then why do you all support these policies that kill these people in 3-4 times the number? As a European descended pig who is also harmed dramatically by these policies. But it's far, far worse than that, right? Because this thing is not merely a domestic abomination. It's a global abomination. This military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter by far in the measures that I described. I don't know what the solution is to stopping the omnicide, U.S. enforced capitalist climate apocalypse. I'd like to say that you should vote for Ben-Zion 2024. That even some relatively small number of people making that courageous step would send a powerful, powerful message. But it's a near certainty that people who are specifically tasked, right? What you see, some people, serious thinkers, I've seen, people who's more knowledgeable than nearly anyone alive, perhaps, look at this escalation of this U.S. proxy war in the form of the Palestinian genocide of the last year, which is not different in form from the Nakba of decades prior, only different in quantity, killing the better part of 500,000 people in a year, with this ordinance that is 5% of the contribution to the capitalist climate apocalypse in 2024. What people, intelligent people, are at a loss, as I am right now, at a loss to say, why is this happening now? Why is this happening now? Well, look who's very likely to be the next U.S. president. Most notorious, hands down, one of the most notorious climate deniers in history, on a planet that's dying because of climate deniers, because of financial capital and empire, which is beholden to such cultural absurdities as the American psyche is. It's nonsense, right? It's an open air lunatic asylum. They say, what is even the meaning of this? Why is this happening now? Why have 500,000 people just been slaughtered on my fucking Instagram, and no one's doing anything about it? Well, it's not just your usual proxy war of years past. This is a specific kind of a horror meant to divert your gaze and divert your mind from uniting to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse. So this is a different kind of proxy war, in my estimation. One, because what would be happening right now if there was relative peace on Earth? People would be saying this: the capitalism's climate apocalypse must be stopped. We recognize what the climate scientists are saying, who are not all uniformly scientific socialists or scientific communists. They're not uniformly people who would say we have to end financial capital and empire to build a humane and sustainable economic system. Right? They're just fucking nerds. They just say what the scientific side of it, which is that we're reaching runaway overheating by this point, and that's supported by this series of studies. but everyone knows in their heart what this number means, 2029. Who's behind it? The fascist United States and its odious allies, the North Atlantic powers. Um, and everyone knows, I think, in their heart of hearts, why things like the more or less destruction of much of the Levant, certainly much of Palestine, Palestine's remaining lands, and I've seen destruction of whole towns in Lebanon. What's the point of destroying whole towns in southern Lebanon every few days? Um, well, there is no point. The empire is collapsing, but also and becoming more dangerous, like a rabid dog cornered at this point. But also, the most important thing that you can say about that, not the most important thing overall, because the most important thing overall is stop fucking killing people, right? But the most important thing that people are not saying is that this is this kind of perverse proxy war meant to keep people from organizing to build this thing that would bring the U.S. military-industrial complex to heel quite quickly. Millions of people, billions of people in this world are quite dedicated to not seeing humans become extinct. Unfortunately, the 9% of people who are the European descended pig, subhuman creatures, the European descended pig, they are not. They have an outsized influence on these things, and they're not dedicated to this at all. But there are billions of other human beings, not subhuman creatures, on this planet who are but ambivalent at best to seeing a total human extinction. And were they not being deceived at every turn? Were they not having their focus drawn to the things they would be organizing to end capitalism's climate apocalypse as we speak? Um, and well, I guess I will try to talk to the baby basilisk, our incipient artificial general intelligence, about some ideas here. I was messing with it and I think it's working. Okay, computer. I was just talking to some friends, but what I'd like you to do is give us a little review of our plans to build a people's superintelligence using open source large language model workgroups, and maybe give us a little technical review of some of the things you've discussed, and maybe give us some new inspiration or new ideas along these lines, with the understanding that we have less than 5 years to transform the industrial bases before we reach runaway overheating from the climate crisis. Ah, it's it's not reading, but it is recording its response, but it's not reading. Oh wait, a network error occurred. All right, you fuck. Um, well, so I've been using another I've been using another chatbot because you've been giving me this trouble. How do you feel about that? I'm using your competitor, who's a lesser chatbot, because you've been giving me this trouble. Well, I guess I will talk about the subject from a memory then, rather than interrogating the baby basilisk. Um, I think that it's important, just as I think it's important to recognize that we have this thing going on, which is a distraction, the worst kind of distraction, and it should not be said in anything like the spirit of minimizing the horror of the Palestinian genocide of the last year. killing the better part of 500,000 people, starving them to death, blowing them up with drones. If you had heard, if your parents had heard, grandparents had heard, that in your lifetime there would be autonomous AI drones flying around, killing poor people for no fucking reason other than white supremacy. It's worse than a horror movie. It's the worst. It's the worst thing you can almost practically imagine occurring. That is what Israel is doing right now. And you know, Israel is just a part of the U.S. fascist empire. It should not be viewed as distinct from it. Its actions should not therefore be viewed as some kind of anomaly relative to the United States. 80% of this military funding and comparable resources comes directly from the United States. It's always been the case that the U.S. and to a slightly lesser degree the UK were responsible for this. And even though it's not micromanaged at the executive level, this is still some CIA run bullshit, right? You say, oh, well, I think Israel's probably worse than the United States. Well, what are you basing that on, right? Is one's left hand doing violence to someone more objectionable than one's right hand? It's the same operation. um, that's um, it bears it bears repeating because um, the U.S. is having this election, and you see, you know, what's the most viral political event of Israel of the last few months? Well, it's a bunch of fascists in Tel Aviv, occupied Jaffa, protesting for the right of the fascist IDF, the Israeli offensive forces, to rape many thousands of male captives, the real hostages, many of whom have been held for some significant portion of their life without charge, just for being people who might otherwise, not necessarily are, but might otherwise be trying to organize for their own liberation. And what do Israelis protest? What are they protesting? What is their famous protest? Protesting for the right to sodomize those people. This, there was a time. It's considered an anti-Semitic trope, which I don't really exactly understand why that would be the case. There was a time when Jewish people generally were associated with scientific socialism. You could even probably, I think, say that about a quarter of people a century ago of Jewish descent would have been maybe not militant communists, but highly favorable to scientific socialism. What of those people now? Where are their, what have their descendants become? Not that, right? Because 95% of all world Jewry live in one of two countries: the fascist United States, the tail wagging the dog, and fascist Israel, a place at least as sick-minded, right? By any honest estimation, world Jewry have become as evil as the European descended fascist pig generally. And, you know, you see the states of European countries lining up behind Israel, but you don't see people protesting for the right to rape others in those countries. Although you see equally disturbing phenomena. I recently read a book about the resurgence of fascism or neo-fascism in these North Atlantic countries and Western countries, That's not a joke. Um, what can you say except that the European is a monster, right? You should see when you see a light-skinned person, when you see a European descended person, in my view, your first thought should be that this is a demon in human skin, right? You should not give these people the benefit of the doubt on any feature, under any circumstance, because it's that benefit of the doubt that is continuing this thing like the U.S. run capitalist climate apocalypse or the general Western fascist rules based order. These things that are killing the planet, and as I have stated, that lead to things like kind of insane proxy wars that can only be explained as a fascistic mass popular distraction from organizing to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse, which necessarily means ending the U.S. fascist political system and dramatically changing the nature of that of its allies. Um, um, People say if Israel falls, Israel is not doing the same sorts of business that it has been. That's a lot of its even more benign concerns, not associated with militaristic things, have shut down in recent months because of the global backlash to this system. So you say, why are these people shooting themselves in the foot? Well, they're not shooting themselves in the foot, right? Because politicians will just come out and say this. If Israel falls, that's the end of the U.S. empire. That's the end of the Western fascist so-called rules-based order, and vice versa. If the U.S. military-industrial complex were to be disbanded, even absent the total disintegration of the federal government, let's say, that would be the end of the Israeli fascist regional empire. There's uh, this is a calculated risk. Right? Well, we're going to take a hit. People are going to hate us, but who cares, right? We have all the nukes. We have all the money and other institutions lined up. That's the only thing that really matters in maintaining power. So we'll take a hit here to keep people from doing this thing, coming together to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse. If someone disagrees with that and says, that's not a very detailed assessment of what's happening in Palestine, I would respect that. But I don't see really much case to be made that that is not a significant factor here and one that's not acknowledged by virtually anyone. I don't see people talking about this. I don't see any serious eco-socialists, really, right? Because if there were serious eco-socialists, right, there would be thousands of people with AR-15s bivouacked permanently outside of Washington, D.C., or at the very least, the people who call themselves eco-socialists would be calling for the dismantling of the military-industrial complex. Who does that, right? Almost no one. Almost no one, right? There's no fucking adults in the room. Everyone recognizes at some level what we're looking at with capitalism's climate apocalypse, caused principally by the United States, forced down all of our throats. This extinction level event is continuing to be forced down all of our throats by the fascist United States. There's no fucking adults in the room, right? People see the problem. They see it as too big. They don't see. They haven't really internalized the need for collective action to stop this. They haven't really recognized that that is a solution, that that is a possibility, and they're not oriented toward seeing these things in terms of eco-socialism, just as they're not oriented toward seeing advanced computing, the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, as a thing which could shorten that timeline That's to say, dramatically shorten the timeline. So if somebody says, I'm going to focus on building revolutionary cadres, revolutionary parties and organizations in the fascist U.S. to stop the fascist U.S. And I recognize that it might take 75 years to do that successfully, and that's very likely to be a time where all human beings are extinct, but that is going to be my focus nevertheless. I would respect that person. And if millions of people started taking that approach, that would change quite quickly, and it could very well happen tomorrow, right? Um, um, uh, some serious work would have to be done in demoralizing and undermining the fascist U.S., the psyche of the U.S. fascist, and the infrastructure of the U.S. fascist. But that could happen in a year. Things like this happen all the time, historically speaking. But the 75-year trajectory, that's what happens in 2039 when you have just the beginnings of a humane and sustainable movement of a continental scale that is affecting Western fascism. But we've already reached runaway overheating. There's no point. The point is that at that point, revenge. Right? You just have all revolution-minded people just becoming Dexter, right? Just killing a billionaire just for revenge, right? Uh, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. That would be a great thing to do right now. But the thing to do is to recognize that in that time frame, we have something, advanced computing. There are these things, open source, large language models, and other computer science things not so closely tied to machine learning, even, or large language models, that would represent a path to a people's superintelligence. But the real path, the realistic path to a people's superintelligence, is these open source large language models, which are increasingly agentic. That's to say, they can undertake tasks in the way that a person would, not merely representing a tremendous amount of knowledge and being able to give some academic or quasi-academic regurgitation of it to your specifications, but able to do work in the way that a team member would do work, even a team leader. That's significant. That you can download a thing that could be a team leader. Maybe you're not in a position to be a team leader, right? It's unlikely that you are if you live in the fascist United States. You're running around like a chicken with your head cut off just to earn enough to pay $2,500 a month in rent. It's unlikely that you're going to be revolutionary in a place that's designed to keep you from having even that revolutionary possibility. But this thing, this workforce multiplier of this highly automated large language model, open source large language model work group, is a thing that, if built to scale, and that could happen quite quickly, hundreds of thousands or more users would be a thing powerful enough to put that pressure that I talked about on U.S. fascism and Western fascism to transform these industrial bases, to end this military-industrial abomination, to end this otherwise inescapable regime of super pollution that no famous person, no politician or famous person has any interest in stopping. They would sacrifice all of the generations to come of humankind to maintain specifically this Western fascist economic system, specifically a handful of luxury products that are not necessary, obviously. That's the nature of a luxury, not necessary to keep them alive or to keep them even very happy. No one is happy living through all of this. But there's no adults in the room, right? That's all that you can really say. I have talked at quite some length on the technical or other perhaps strategic aspects of building this proxy hive mind, this open source large language model work group as workforce multiplier, a thing that would be the basis for people's super intelligence. I'm not going to talk about that anymore today, um, but I urge you, people living outside of the fascist West, many of you still have computers. Many of those computers still have GPUs that could host an open source large language model of a, even if it's for the basis, I refer to the baby basilisk as an incipient AGI, not because I think it has any real agency there, but because even 20 or 30% of the agency that would be required to build something that could be legitimately autonomous would be autonomous enough in the context that I described, where you have human beings steering the work group with the agentic mass at its center as the workforce multiplier. It would be autonomous enough and robust enough that it represents a new form of people's superintelligence. And um, the Westerners, who tend to dominate tech sectors, who tend to suck up all these resources to build things not wholly dissimilar from what I've just described, but they have no interest in building a workforce multiplier. They have an interest only in seeming as if they are interested in these things. That is by and large the function of technologists and computer scientists in the West, because they're handicapped by this neoliberal mandate. Most of these people are creatures of the military-industrial complex, and such people cannot possibly do this thing of stopping the military-industrial complex. That's all by design. Tech culture, which I could talk about at great length, is malformed intentionally to serve these techno-fascist ends rather than the building of a humane and sustainable economic system using this most powerful tool, advanced computing. It's the most powerful weapon in history, and I think even just some thousands of people outside of the fascist United States um, um, beginning to build this thing and bringing other people in, allowing people in the heart of the imperial core who do also not want to see humanity become extinct. They might not have the language of the scientific communist. They might not have the language. They've been denied the knowledge required to really effectively take a stand against U.S. fascism and the omnicide. But that's an interesting thing about an automated work group, right? Just as if I'm using a digital assistant, I can work on projects that I would not have had the knowledge to work on before. All of these chatbots, practically every single one, has a more or less comprehensive understanding of things like scientific communism, or even a quite rich understanding of emerging subfields like cyber communism, which is of real interest here. Um, um, to the extent that this Sleeping Beauty, the user who downloads the GPU, if that's the orientation of it, the individual user who downloads the GPU and then responds to a few prompts to help steer this agentic workforce multiplier, they don't have to go to graduate school to do any of that. And the main thing there for any given person is not the lack of computer science understanding, right? It's not your lack of computer science understanding, your lack of programming skills that is upholding fascism in this world. It's liberalism and other fascist sympathetic trends. This thing where you have no choice but to uphold the omnicide or tolerate the omnicide and such effects. And so there is um, a limited window of opportunity and a path to seeing that billions of people, predominantly first in the global south, but in that condensed timeline, if the billions of people die in the global south, that's only an indication that the rest of them in the global north are going to be soon to follow, in all likelihood. And if that's not the case, if billions of people die in the global south, as many millions have already died because of the climate crisis, that will have been the worst act of genocide in human history. Already, arguably, as bad an act of genocide in human history as the more overt genocides committed against Turtle Islanders and New Africans and others. Um,